This is the unrestricted free agent.
Oh, he's just going to go out there and kill him.
Wow. Welcome into the program. Glad you're here. And I just pulled my microphone completely off the table.
Oh, I think South Carolina's catching Clemson. I really do. Not what we've seen so far. They haven't closed the gap.
Defense, I'm going to tell you right now, they're nasty. They're going to be nasty all year.
You know, I want to repent and apologize. I haven't really seen that.
When you see black and white and you're calling it purple, I got problems with that.
And LC's, I told you, it's all about the deer talk.
How about that for a start? A weird week for Gamecock football. Weird week. 2 games. Last 2 games, more than 50 plus points. I don't like the offense. Taking on an opponent Gamecock fans are just used to beating, but have only beaten once in the last 8 years. Taking on a coach Gamecock fans aren't too happy with, aren't overly impressed with, never lost to the Gamecocks at home. That's where we are. October 5th, 2022. Welcome in to Unrestricted Free Agent. See you guys on the live chat already weighing in. Anthony in first with a good morning UFAs. Jason with a morning exclamation point. Watch out for Jason. And Chris in on the Facebook live stream. Good morning, Tim, fellow Gamecocks from the Coastal Carolina campus. All right, Chris, well done. Thanks for spreading us out all the way over to Conway this morning. We got the entire state covered then. I'm up in the Fort Mill area. We got that whole border right around just south of North Carolina covered. So, what do you think? To me, I feel like, man, it's a weird spot. You knew what the schedule was going to be. You knew Arkansas and Georgia were up first in the SEC, and it was going to be really difficult for a team that was, again, fortunate to win 7 games last year. We didn't see it coming. It took a really good push at the end of the season. It took a couple of near miraculous wins to get there. Near miraculous wins against East Carolina and Vanderbilt last year to help get to those 7 wins. I think mostly what it's been so far from the Gamecock football perspective is what we saw happen with Clemson all last season, right? Did they ever play their best football? DJU never did. And now this year, he's a completely different guy. Completely different guy. Maybe not in the first 2.5 quarters of the Georgia Tech game to open, but man, since then, he's just been a different dude, right? Does Spencer Rattler have that in him in one season at Carolina or his first season at Carolina? He's hoping it's one season, I think. I think Gamecock fans need to hope that too. You need to hope that at the end of the year, you'll be able to separate 2022. First 5 games, last 7 games. First 5 games, working it out. I guess technically you could maybe separate the first 3 games since you have had 50-plus point offensive performances now in the last 2 games. But Charlotte and SC State, I don't think that's never going to stick in anyone's memory, I don't think. In perpetuity, thinking about a year. Oh, remember that? I mean, Marshawn Lloyd, the hurdle against Charlotte. Yeah, that one time. But if Gamecock fans have their way, or if things go their way, then there will be other larger highlights to remember. Maybe not as dramatic, but certainly more important or against better teams, at least. And Mark Stoops, the Kentucky coach, speaking highly of Marshawn Lloyd yesterday. I listen to those things back to back, and I try to do that as much as possible, as opposed to listening to them in real time. because the only real bearing is on Saturday, right? So you got plenty of time in these weekly press conferences, whenever they are, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. But Shane Beamer and Mark Stoops happen to have theirs on Tuesday, yesterday. So last night, I'm listening to them for the first time. And I have never heard two coaches at the same point of their weeks. I guess Mark Stoops probably did his earlier yesterday. He did have a cup of coffee with him, so I'm assuming it wasn't a 1:30 in the afternoon press conference like Shane Beamer, so I'll give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt there. And I know the Gamecocks had already wrapped up practice, I think is how their day works. So maybe not quite at the same point in their week, but both on the same day of their week, of game week. Never heard two coaches sound like they were farther apart, farther removed, or close to their last game. There was very little discussion about what happened in South Carolina's last game. It had been Thursday night. Makes sense, right? And it was against South Carolina State. And there was a lot of discussion and a lot of still emotional attachment from Mark Stoops about that tough Ole Miss loss. Makes sense to a certain degree. But this is when you hear, and Mark Stoops even said it, and he said his players said it, you can't let one loss turn into two. Got to get over it and move on. And you could really still see the process. We've seen this in South Carolina too many times, right? When a really, really important game doesn't go your way, the weekly press conference a couple of days after, there's still a lot of questions or a lot of resolution. You're still trying to get some, closure, looking for closure, right? Still working out that closure process. And I absolutely felt like that's what Mark Stoops was doing. That's what the entire Kentucky conversation was in a lot of ways at his press conference. There was the usual, they're a well-coached team, and what about Spencer Rattler? No, he's a good player, and Marshawn Lloyd, good player. There was a little bit of that. Very little, though. There was a lot of, oh, man, I really like how our team played. It was a great college football game. Really like how we competed in it. It was a good sign, taking away good things from that. So close. And yeah, we got to look at a couple of different things. And Will Levis, yeah, how would you feel if your finger went sideways and you had to put it back in, but he doesn't need surgery? And really interesting. How much bearing it has on this week's game, I got no idea. Probably very little, right? Keep in mind, it was Tuesday. You can listen to Will Muschamp all you want to and believe that, hey, you know why we win games on Saturday is how we prepared on Tuesday or Wednesday. I ain't buying it. Right? I'm much more the Steve Spurrier mindset. Yeah, you got to go do it under the lights. You can have good practices all you want. Sometimes it translates. Sometimes it just doesn't. I'm hoping one of these days. Actually, I think we have heard some coaches every now and again. I think Frank Martin might have done this a time or two. Say, yeah, this was kind of surprising. We had a good game today because we had an awful practice yesterday. Right? Very rarely do you hear that. Most of the time you hear the usual coach speak, oh, man, these guys really prepared so hard and so proud of their determination, and, how you kind of rewrite that story around the result. Sometimes it's true. I'd say most of the time your feelings and comments kind of based on the results. So I think it's just an odd time because on paper, clearly South Carolina has the preparation advantage, having moved their game up a couple of days, given their team off. And that's the other thing I saw and heard, I guess. Maybe that's why it was so obvious, too, listening to Spencer Rattler talk yesterday. It was South Carolina they stole another bye week. They got to hang out on Saturdays. Marcellus Dial said he was playing Call of Duty a little bit. Watching a little tape. Shane Beamer's Saturday was a lot like most of our Saturdays, I'm guessing, if you had a good one. That he watched a lot of football, woke up, had some coffee, watched a little game day, watched some early football, went on a walk with the family, came back, watched some more football, ate some Mexican food that got delivered to his house, built a fire outside, watched some football, went to bed 11 o'clock. Great day. He's like, so this is how it is when you're not working on Saturdays during football season. Basically, a Saturday during a bye week. If your coach is not a maniac making coaches still work on Saturdays during the bye week. Chris, we really had a really good practice speak. Irks me, LOL. I'm with you on that, man. I mean, you would rather hear that from your coach than the opposite, right? But when they really place a lot of importance on that, it's crazy to me. Well, the where you really get ticked off is at the end of the week where you don't see it on Saturday, right? You don't get the result. So, tons of college football to get to. Plenty of comments from Shane Beamer's weekly press conference to get to on the show today. We got Corey Miller set to join us at 9 o'clock. Hey, man, I'm just reporting here. He said it was, well, not as specific as he was even asked where he got it, and then he decided not to give the shout out. He didn't want to tick anybody off. Kens, good morning to you too, sir. Just started this morning by saying what a weird spot it is, I think, for Gamecock football. It's ultimately weird to me because of the overhyped amount of importance that's being placed on this specific game this weekend. Because numbers say Carolina ain't winning this game. Double-digit underdog. Haven't beaten Mark Stoops in Lexington. Last Carolina win, 2012. Look, if this was anybody in the SEC West, I think Gamecock fans would have a much different feel, but I understand it. This is not some team in the West that you play every now and again and that has a storied tradition. And no, this was a respectable brand in the SEC that you instantly kind of inserted yourself above in the conference totem pole in football. And it was the only one, right? Vanderbilt's not a respected brand in the SEC. But Carolina was always above Vanderbilt and Kentucky in the SEC East since its inception until the last 8 years, where Kentucky has won 7 out of 8. And every year, it seems like Gamecock fans have convinced themselves that, Carolina should win that game. And they can win that game. And if they don't win that game, it's not going to be a good season. Well, last year showed us that's not the case, right? Last year was a good season for Shane Beamer. It was a very close game against Kentucky, 16-10 the final score. Kentucky escaping Williams-Brice. Craig, good morning to you too, sir. And maybe it's 2022 uniquely. Maybe it's the political climate. Maybe it is where social media just has us in general. I don't know what it is. But maybe it's the college football playoff environment in college football specifically, where it's kind of boom or bust at a lot of places. But this is where I'm confused. I think, and I said this many times, I thought the South Carolina fan base handled the Will Muschamp era as well as you could ever ask any good college football fan base to handle it. His hiring after Steve Spurrier was a head scratcher. And yet there was patience there. There was support there. South Carolina fans, by and large, wanted Will Muschamp to be the guy. You could make up the narrative, right? Oh, Bill Belichick didn't work out in his first head coaching jobs. It happens a lot of times. This is a guy who's got a chip on the shoulder, blue-collar kind of guy, defensive mentality. He can be our kind of guy. and it didn't work out. And when it wasn't working out, I think the fan base responded accordingly. A lot of smart fans, good fans, shut their mouths. And sometimes they didn't show up. And that's the loudest protest. The best way, in my opinion, as a fan, you can show your support for the program at large, or your rejection of your head coach saying that you need to make a change, man. Chris, good to see some optimism. Says, I'm feeling very optimistic today. Kentucky only has one more win than we do. You want to feel even more optimistic? Let's check out the numbers, right? Did this a little bit yesterday. And it's really surprising to me. Check out these numbers for the season, man. You want to feel optimistic, just look at these numbers. Carolina's offense is a touchdown better than Kentucky's offense this year. Defense is 13 points worse. You probably want to ignore that one. The run game for the Gamecocks, notably better than Kentucky, which a couple of weeks ago, we would have never seen this coming. I think the numbers were very similar to what Kentucky has right there at 2.5 yards per carry. Again, Chris Rodriguez just played his first game. Keep that in mind. Opponents' rush yards, you probably want to gloss over that, right? So I should say the offensive numbers are better here. Defensive numbers certainly aren't. Pass game numbers favor Kentucky, but just slightly. Third down conversions, turnovers, certainly not in – turnovers aren't listed on here, but not in your favor. Let's go back to some other numbers. How about these are the turnover stats, right? First column, how many have happened this season? Second column, SEC rank. Last column, national rank. Yeah, fumbles aren't encouraging here. Turnovers gained, passes intercepted. First in the SEC, 7 passes picked, 13th best in the country. Pretty good. Everything else, not so good. And turnover margin, turnovers lost, amongst the worst in the country. 9 picks, amongst the worst in the country. Defensive stats, pass defense, again, real good. 23rd in the country. Rush defense, not so good. 107th. Total defense, kind of right in the middle. 62 in the country right now. Scoring defense, a little worse than that, giving up 27 points. 79th in the country. Notable, all right? I think notable. And then some offensive stats that aren't so good here. Giving up 14 sacks is 126th in the country right now. Tackles for loss allowed is the exact same number as tackles for loss, I guess, 105th in the country. Makes sense, right? Third down percentage and opposing third down percentage, 85th and 91st. Not so good. But we've seen offensive numbers be worse than that, right? Just wanted to nerd it up, show you a little bit of that first. Yep, did see that yesterday, Craig. Brad Crawford from 24/7 Sports, I believe, put out a tweet yesterday that South Carolina's defense has blitzed more than any other Power 5 defense percentage-wise this year and only has 4 sacks. Again, Craig, do we have to get into the sack conversation from yesterday? I hope not. It's a concern, no doubt about it. No doubt. Matt, hey. Like the enthusiasm, Matt. Good to hear from you, sir. Gamecocks in an odd spot. Gamecock fans, I think. Wanted to touch on baseball real quick, and then we'll do college football the rest of the time. Atlanta Braves appreciation minute here. First time since 2003, the Braves have won more than 100 games, I think. They wrap up their 5th straight NL East title last night. Middle relievers are the offensive linemen of baseball, aren't they? Nobody ever gives middle relievers any credit, do they? Unless it's always the blame. It's always, oh no, going to the bullpen, they're going to blow another lead. You never give them any credit for what happened yesterday, holding on to the 2-1 lead after the starter leaves in the 5th after the 5th inning, bang, bang, bang. Braves, incredible, man. And did you see this? If you've been on social media at all today and you follow any kind of Braves account, they're all pretty hilarious. It is running down the Mets, a lot of that, the flash, I think is what he's called, right, in baseball. One of the in between innings deals where they let a fan start running, get a big head start, and then this dude zooms by him. What else have I seen? A few others. There are a bunch of stuff going on with Braves logos and Mets logos, and I laughed at all of them. And then I saw a number, I forget who put it up, 289 days the Mets in the last 2 years have been in first place, more than anyone in baseball in the last 2 seasons. 289 days, and yet no titles to show for it. That is absolutely brutal. I feel like that is a lot of the Braves' constant postseason disappointment in my lifetime, kind of coming back around from the baseball god perspective. What a year it's been. Brian Snitker deserves all the credit. Good to see Ronald Acuna Jr. being a part of it. He had the first RBI yesterday when William Contreras has a massive swing and barely taps one down the third base line and beats it out for the second RBI, which turned out to be the game winner. And would have been absolutely a brutal emotional roller coaster to have swept New York at home over the weekend, then go to Miami, lose all of those, and watch the Mets win it against the Washington Nationals, right? Which they had 7 runs in the first inning last night, game number 2 of the doubleheader. Had they have won one game in Atlanta over the weekend, they would be your NL East champions. They would be the ones getting the bye. Instead, it's the Atlanta Braves, seemingly set up in great shape now to get back to the World Series. Dodgers getting the number 1 seed. Braves will get the number 2 seed. Then you got 4 teams, the 3 wild cards, and the Mets. Well, you got the Phillies, the Cardinals. Sorry. Yeah, the Cardinals were the division winner, right? You got the Phillies, the Mets, and one other wild card winner. Who is it? Help me out here. I'm going to not like myself for this. I forget off the top of my head. I should know it. I'll get to it eventually. I know the playoff spots are nailed down. But the other big news in baseball that is taking my attention away from this, and I'll get it here in just a second. Number 62, finally, right? Finally, Aaron Judge. And not exactly historic fashion yesterday in Texas. You saw the guy jumping out of the stands to try to get the ball. Good for the guy who caught it. Says he doesn't know what he's going to do with it yet. Good for him. Wasn't exactly the picturesque scene that I'm sure all ESPN executives were pulling for and trying to make sure that all college football fans saw live. And it turned into a joke, didn't it? An absolute joke. And I feel bad for Aaron Judge for that he becoming kind of a punchline in baseball. Padres, the other postseason team that I didn't mention, by the way. Sorry about that. But Judge hit 62. I hope we can be done with that. American League record. Good for him. You want to get up on the soapbox and say he's the true home run king in a single season because he's not roided up. Go right ahead. I don't have much enthusiasm for that discussion. My kids were, my 9 and 7-year-old trying to take all this in. I told him he had 62. He's like, oh, so he's the best ever. He's got the record, right? He didn't use the medicine. Is how I put it to them. Or maybe my 9-year-old might have even said drugs. I don't know. I still don't know how to have that conversation with my kids. I don't. And my 7-year-old's pretty sure. He's like, nah, Sammy Sosa had 66. Record's 73. I just don't know how to do it. But I'm glad it happened. Aaron Judge, easy to pull for. I don't like the Yankees. No one liked the cut-ins over college football. So glad it's done. Glad we can move on. And looking forward was talking to my 9-year-old yesterday how much I love October with the overlap of football really cranking up now, especially this year for the Gamecock perspective is a great example of that. And then postseason baseball starting Friday, wild card round, 2 wild card series in each league, best of 3s to get to the division round where the top 2 teams, top 2 division winners have the byes. Craig says it's steroids, not heroin, Tim. You can talk with them about it. Yeah, but all right. Thanks, Craig. DC says, good morning, everybody. Good morning, DC. Good to have you. Good to have you. Let's get back into college football, shall we? And let's do it first with the Shane Beamer comment yesterday. Nothing overwhelmingly newsworthy about what you would expect from Shane Beamer. And this is the best way to start here. Carolina, Kentucky, 7:30 Saturday night.
SEC Saturday night game.
Screwed it up, didn't I? Absolutely screwed it up. Let's try that again.
SEC Saturday night game, under the lights, on the road, national television. I mean, what more could you want? I mean, that should be exciting and should be fun. And want our guys to have fun playing with each other and playing with passion and celebrating with each other as well. And now you got to go play well in order to do that.
The question was asked by WIS's Rick Henry, I believe. That's the answer you heard. But are your guys having more fun now? Did you see in the last 2 games where you had a lot more success offensively? Are they having more fun? And so that was part of the answer there. Remember, so let's fast forward all the way to the end, right? Shane Beamer was asked about what we heard first, I believe, from Marshawn Lloyd about the team exercise, the metaphor that the team actually went out and did. That there were pieces, they set up pieces of trash in the locker room. Everybody had to go pick up a piece of trash, put it in the locker room. It was supposed to be symbolic of whatever might be holding you back from being your best. Clear it out, clean it up, and move forward. I thought it was an interesting take from Shane on that exercise.
And you never know how those things are going to go. You may think it's really corny and cheesy, and I didn't know. We walked out of the team meeting room, walked down to the locker room, and there was just 150 pieces of trash laying on the floor that we had put out. And players, coaches, staff, everybody picked up something and threw it away. And you never know, but it was pretty cool. A lot of the guys, players, seniors, that came up to me afterwards and thanked me and said we needed that. And one of the coolest things I've been a part of, stuff like that. So I don't know. We've won the last 2 since we did it. So maybe hopefully it helped. But I do think just the message of it. And we still talk about it now. Like, don't let this trash come back in and clutter ourselves up. Like, just keep ourselves continuing to get better and not let any outside noise or talking heads on social media that think they know what the heck they're talking about and don't affect what we have going on in here.
Interesting stuff there, isn't it? And again, I think it goes back to the climate that Gamecock football finds itself in, kind of creating its own prison to a certain degree. Last year's success raised expectations. You win 4 games last year. You're 3-2 this year. I think everybody's pretty happy, right? Everybody's pretty pleased that things are moving forward. You feel like, you got at least 4 wins this year, and then you got how many different shots? Now you would have 6 more shots this year to pull an upset, improve. You got to be patient. But instead of 4 wins in year number 1, you got 7. And then you add in Spencer Rattler coming into your program, along with a couple of wide receivers you expected to help the offense. You have year number 2 in a system where a lot of times year number 2 under a college football coach, you can really make a significant move. Will Muschamp won an Outback Bowl in year number 2, for instance. And yet, you're now going to take on a Kentucky program that has moved past you a while ago from an SEC football program standpoint. You're watching a Tennessee program who has hit the old turbo boost And with their second-year head coach is a top 10 team. It seems to be pretty legit. So that is part of why Carolina fans, part of why what Shane was talking about there, talking heads on social media, aren't singing Kumbaya and everyone's singing the praises of the program and We Are the World. Yeah, the We Are the World is much more fun than Kumbaya. Used to do that on my first radio program. So fun. So, but I think it's still overhyped. Everything going into this Kentucky game. You lose the Kentucky game, that's what this program has been, especially on the road. Shane Beamer hasn't won an SEC road game. He hasn't been close to favored in one either, I don't think. This is double-digit spread, man. I get it. Carolina fans don't want to remain where the program has been and believe that Shane Beamer can be the guy to move this thing forward for sure. Would love to see it happen in nearly the same way and kind of the same way in similar fashion where it happened a little ahead of schedule last year, didn't it? And you would love to see that progress continue. The problem is you got to go through other SEC programs to do it. And they're going through their own stuff. And you did it last year, and you caught Dan Mullen in Florida when they were at their worst. Auburn, dumpster fire. You got that win, and then you were able to run through a North Carolina defense that was near non-existent. Question in from Matt. Where do we see Spencer Rattler next season? Drafted, undrafted, maybe back at Carolina for a surprise senior year? Impossible to predict right now. Impossible. I'd say the best case scenario from the Gamecocks perspective is drafted, and drafted highly, because the final 7 games, he showed that he's a big-time quarterback, which I think it's very fair to say, in the first 5 games, hasn't shown that. Shown that he certainly has a big-time arm, has pocket presence, is an upgrade at quarterback from what Shane Beamer and Marcus Satterfield had to work with in year number 1. Other than that, it's also shown that he'll turn the ball over. His receivers have shown that they haven't helped him out in that category, especially in the last game. Shown that last year's top target isn't a favorite of his in Josh Vann. Has struggled to get the ball to Jaheim Bell in the passing game consistently. So he's shown all these things. I'd say, Matt, if we're going to Craig, this is classic where Gamecock fans are right now. He returns or transfers unless we get a new offensive coordinator. I think it is fair to say right now it doesn't seem like drafted is the answer. I'm not an NFL guy. Get my old buddy Patrick Perrette on here and do all the NFL draft analysis. I'm guessing NFL scouts still see plenty of potential in him. I don't know where he is sitting right now on a lot of draft boards. I think that's very fair. I mean, how many quarterbacks have had, I don't even know what we call it, have had a level of success, have lost their starting job, have transferred over, and have been, I think, mediocre. Isn't that a fair way to put it right now? Less than stellar, and then gone on to an NFL career of success. I don't remember that being a path for anyone. Shane Beamer throws the Jalen Hurts comparison out there, and it does make sense, transferring from one big-time program to another. And the fact that Spencer Rattler saw that his first year, his redshirt year at Oklahoma, saw how Jalen Hurts handled it. But Jalen Hurts had accomplished so much more at that point in his career and had been benched for 1/2 of his starting football tenure and been really the starter and what the SEC Freshman of the Year, and then the next year got his team to the national championship game. A little bit different than Spencer Rattler's 2-year run at Oklahoma. And certainly what he did then when Hurts transferred to Oklahoma has been a lot different. I guess we could go back and look at the first 5 games there, but I would imagine especially the touchdown to interception ratio much different than what Rattler's done so far. The passing yards, pretty decent, right? So for me, let's see, Matt says, fair enough. The idea just came up last night. Wasn't sure if it would benefit us to have him for another year or not. Just a random question. Well, if you're talking about 2023, would you prefer to have Spencer Rattler as your quarterback or not? Yeah, you'd probably prefer to have him, I would think. But I'm amazed or saddened, disappointed. Shouldn't be, I guess. All these things come up when I have seen some social media posts about Luke Doty. I guess I've seen the gamut, right? I've seen some people come out with the hot take. I think Chris Phillips from the Spurs Up show. Doty's actually better suited than Spencer Rattler and Marcus Satterfield's offense. I've seen the others like, I don't even want to see Doty play. I want to see Tanner Bailey play because we know what Doty is, and he's not going to be the guy. So those opinions spanning the spectrum right now about Luke Doty. I think the best thing for the Gamecock program, Matt, is a very easy answer. That Spencer Rattler goes on to play tremendous football for the next 7 games, gets drafted highly, and Luke Doty takes over in 2023. It's the absolute best case scenario for Gamecock football. If Spencer Rattler's back in 2023, maybe it's better for the 2023 team. But I don't think it's best for the program. Certainly, it would be a bad sign for the 2022 season. DC, this makes no sense to me, man. None. This, to me, is the get right game, DC says. I think we have very different definitions of the get right game. Before I stand up on my soapbox and rant and rave, let's finish what DC has to say. All the negatives so far this season can be put in the rearview mirror. Everything this staff has told recruits can be completed Saturday. What? I get you can certainly forget any kind of first 5 game frustrations if you win this game. So all the negatives so far this season can be put in the rearview mirror if you win it, is what you're saying. But the next part, everything the staff has told recruits can be completed Saturday. No, not at all. You'd be 4-2. You beat Kentucky. Is that all the staff is telling recruits? Hey, we think we can beat Kentucky. No, this is my exact point. In DC, I know you've been salty, maybe the saltiest of the group that we have on the show of the regulars, about the frustrations, especially offensively. And I think it's fair to say that you just expected this team to look much more improved through 5 games in the 2022 season than it's looked. I think that's very fair from any Gamecock fan. But now to overhype this game as the end-all be-all, and it's a get right games are what you just had. They're against opponents that you should absolutely beat and that you have a significant talent advantage against. Craig says, no, DC, because if you go and do it on the road against Kentucky, why didn't you do it against all the other opponents we played? This is the other part, right? This is a great example of you're never going to make everybody happy. What do you mean the other opponents we play? Why didn't you do it against Georgia? They did it to some degree against Arkansas, Craig. Let's all the other opponents we play. Stop the hype. Stop it. You guys are have hit the hyperdrive button, hit the turbo boost button on the emotional roller coaster of the season. Matt, I don't know where this came from. Bring back Lou Holtz. Crazy. You guys are nuts. I think you may have lost it. Let's get some more Shane Beamer comments in here to try to bring back this one is a an excellent place to start, I think, because winning on the road has to become a thing for South Carolina football again. Unfortunately for Gamecock fans, it's Dabo Sweeney who says it the most plainly, or who I've heard say it the most plainly. If you're going to be a good team, he says championship team, I think, you got to win on the road. That's kind of the first baby step for South Carolina. Maybe being asked to do that in their first 2 road games this year at Arkansas, at Kentucky. Tough tasks for sure, but kind of really symbolic or emblematic maybe of the challenge that is South Carolina football and playing in the SEC. Here's what Shane Beamer had to say about winning on the road.
To me, a great road team is they're able to respond to adversity and not flinch and just get stronger. And we didn't get off to a great start at Arkansas. There's no doubt about it. We were down 21-3. But I think a team that's not built to handle the road gets blown out of that game. You know, we battled back and made it 21-16 in the third quarter. And then we didn't lose the game to Arkansas because we were on the road or because we couldn't handle the environment. We lost to Arkansas because we couldn't stop the run and we turned the ball over 3 times in the fourth quarter, you know. So what we need to do is embrace going on the road as a competitor. You love going into another stadium, and I'm sure it'll be rocking up there on Saturday night as it should be. And then we've just got to do what we talk about doing that helps us win football games, running the ball and stopping the run and creating turnovers and playing smart football and winning the fourth quarter and winning the explosive play battle. You know, do that and play well. But I feel like we're a mature team that has handled that. We showed some maturity last week, handling the short week, and it's going to be critical for us to be mature, resilient, composed, physical, all that stuff in order to win on the road.
All that stuff. Do all those things you talk about. No doubt about it. And maybe that's what has Gamecock fans in such a compromising position or feeling so exposed right now. I feel like that's what I'm kind of dealing with. That, hey, all those years, this program was better than Kentucky. Now it's not. And it to me, it feels like a lot like what the Tennessee fan base must have been feeling like the last decade or so, watching South Carolina pull at least even and ahead of that program. Not familiar territory and really unsettling. So I think that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. And then what we heard from Shane is exactly where South Carolina is, I should say. You got to do what you talk about doing. You can't have it up in the football facility. Got to stop the run, got to be able to run the football, and then not do that against Georgia State. And then expect your fans to feel good about the direction of the program or feel good about the season watching that season opener. Now, they're taking care of that a little bit, right? In the last 2 get-right games, they have gotten right. But the fan base has not. 50-plus point performances haven't allowed anybody to feel real good about going on the road to Kentucky just because of the eye test, right? If those 50-plus point games, if 49 of those points had come in the first half against Charlotte and SC State, then I think it would be a different story, right? That's just not how it worked out. And John, great to see that you're out of the hospital. Good morning to you too, sir. Craig says, I guess my main complaint is we have Spencer Rattler and we either throw it behind the line of scrimmage or 40 yards downfield. It just doesn't make sense to me. Craig, you don't care that it doesn't make sense to you. You care that it hasn't been overly effective, right? If you say, oh, man, this offense is pretty crazy. It doesn't make sense to me, but it works. I love it. Here's the deal with that, though, Craig. Playing against Kentucky, they don't allow deep balls like other teams allow, or they haven't in the past. I'd be shocked if that happens this Saturday. I think you're going to see a lot more of Spencer Rattler medium range passes this Saturday, if Carolina's going to have any kind of success. Anthony, I love this great debate on a Wednesday morning. I guess the debate is, how much does the Kentucky game matter? And I'm not trying to argue that the Kentucky game isn't important or isn't a really, really significant game in Shane Beamer's tenure. I'm just trying to say, I think Gamecock fans have gone too far, have tilted way too far in making this one more important than it actually is. What's really important there was part of Shane's answer in there. And I understand if you're really frustrated, you can say, oh, well, Shane's just saying they're a decent road team because they didn't get blown out. What kind of moral victory talk is that? But what I heard in there was what I've talked about in this program that's going to be how I evaluate it in year number 2 under Shane Beamer. How competitive are you? Especially against upper tier teams on the road. And to make that game 21-16 at Arkansas, to put it in doubt, was a step forward. Now, that can't be the measuring stick the entire year of just getting closer in games. And then you say, oh, we had a great season because we lost a lot of games, but we lost them close. No, it's not just that. You still got to win some games. But you also need to be more competitive. Josh, our defense is going to be exposed on Saturday. We'll have to score a lot of points to win. Josh, the defense has been exposed already. How can you be more exposed than what Georgia did? It was 48-0 at your place. Exposure has happened. No one thinks right now this South Carolina defense is one of the best defenses in the country. The SEC, maybe South Carolina, the state I'm talking about, maybe the third best defense. I think Coastal Carolina might have better defensive numbers right now than the Gamecocks. I think, again, this goes into Carolina fans thinking about Kentucky. If Kentucky right now runs up a bunch of points and yards, then the defense, then you're kind of giving up on the defense. Is that where you are, Josh? If Georgia did it, it's one. I mean, Arkansas, they were one play away from scoring 50, right? The scoop and score that was called back. The defense has been exposed. Defense has been exposed since the season opener in 2014, man. When since then has the South Carolina defense been much more than that? Anthony was asked for his take, so he gives it. The Kentucky game isn't the get-right game for me. Win more than he did last year, and that's considered improvement to me. We'll be just fine. DC says, if you go tell these recruits that you're building something at Carolina and get totally wrecked at Kentucky, then everyone thinks is a basketball school. I wouldn't buy that. Well, I understand what you're saying, DC, but I don't think you're understanding the sales pitch then. They're not pitching, we're building something here that will eventually win 9, 10, 11 games. They're pitching the love of your brother and how our program, I imagine this is how they say it in the living room, our program is built differently. We have different values than other programs. We see you as a whole person, the whole thing. So when you speak in those terms, the way that Shane Beamer has spoken more than any other college football coach I've ever heard in my life, I would imagine that an easy answer to, hey, but yeah, you just got blown out by Kentucky. You're right. We didn't play well that day. And it's another reason why we need you. And we're never going to assess our program based off just the scoreboard. It's always going to be about much more than that. Maybe some sort of spiel like that. And it's just year 2. We got players left over in the program that haven't quite bought in like you're going to be able to buy in, that I wasn't able to sit in their living rooms and talk to and evaluate and the whole thing like I'm doing with you. That's not what this program is going to be. It's still early kind of thing. Because DC, anybody else out there, Josh, it is still so early in the Shane Beamer tenure. I feel like you guys, and maybe this is where college football is, right? We just saw Wisconsin fire Paul Chryst, Colorado get rid of Carl Durrell 5 games into the year. Georgia Tech, Jeff Collins, see ya. I understand. Football coaches getting paid a ton of money. It's win now. What have you done for me lately? Transfer portal, NIL world. I get it. It is different. It is fast forwarded. I'm not saying sitting here saying you got to give Shane Beamer 7-8 years or something ridiculous. But I am saying after a very successful year number 1, to get to the point in game 6 of year 2 saying, well, this has to be the get right game. If Carolina can't beat Kentucky or if their defense gives up a bunch of points and yards, I'm going to throw my hands up and turn my back on the program or feel like this season's going to be a complete failure, then I don't understand. I don't get that. Craig, and on defense before the season, I would have said the 2 players we couldn't lose are Mo Kaba and Jordan Strawn. Birch is not quick twitch like Strawn was. I disagree with that. You don't get to be a 5-star guy if you're not quick twitch. Maybe it looks a little different because Birch is bigger. And I understand. I'm not trying to tell you that I think Birch has been a fantastic player in his time at Carolina. I think he has underperformed as opposed to the 5-star expectation. I still think he's a really good player, though. John, we're 3-2. Let's just get out there and support the team. Brighter futures lie ahead. DC, us at Carolina are going to stay at the bottom, but we are going to love each other more than any other team. DC mocking the sales pitch. That's not it, man. That's not it at all. But just because you don't beat Kentucky this year doesn't mean you're staying at the bottom. They were predicted second in the East, man. They were just in the top 10. You're playing them at their place. What are you talking about? I think you still have the same perception of Kentucky like it's 2008 or 6 or when was it? Maybe 2010 or 11 when Connor Shaw came in. It was 56-3. They just run. Let's see, we're an even year now, so that would have been 2011, right? They're playing even years at Kentucky, odd years at Carolina. Yeah, this ain't that, DC. You got to get out of that mindset. You have to evolve. Josh says, I'm very optimistic about the future, just not the present. I can understand that. I think you guys are using your eyes. You are analyzing what you have seen. And I get that. And I'm not here to sell you that Carolina is something this year that we haven't seen yet. I'm not here to sell you that, but I am here to sell you that last year, 5 games in, it wasn't real pretty either. But the expectation was so low that none of you where anywhere close to where you are right now emotionally with this team. And you've gone too far. Back. John, trust the process. Clayton White will figure it out. I may be worried about Marcus Satterfield, but let's have a little faith. Beamer's the right coach for the job. Well, nobody's saying he's not. Troy, I get that, and you're certainly not the only one to say that. Jordan Birch, very overrated in my opinion. But all it would take, a few significant plays and a few significant games, and his reputation changes real quick. Certainly has the talent to do that, but he hasn't made those plays outside of one pick six against Eastern Illinois. We haven't seen those plays consistently. Carolina does have 4 sacks through 5 games. That ain't good. Those are facts. Craig, sorry, back in. DC, Tim is our counselor. We should be sitting on a couch. And Mac, our fellow word nerd here, doesn't like the misspelling of Jordan Birch's last name. Mac, Troy is our resident Clemson fan. I think you got to give him a little grace. He actually, as opposed to a lot of Clemson fans, is pretty rational, reasonable on our show. I'd say 95% of the time, which is a much higher degree of rationality than most of you. Yeah, I'm looking at most of you. Let's listen to a little bit more of Shane Beamer. And again, Corey Miller's set to join us in the next few minutes or so. I guess he's traveling this week down in Florida, so we missed him on Monday. Hoping to get him here in the next couple of minutes because I am wildly interested to talk to Corey about both where Carolina fans are, where he is with this team and this game, and then the Clemson conversation as well, because I think Clemson has convinced me, excuse me, I'm really getting pumped up now with the hands. Clemson has convinced me that they are back this year. That last year was the anomaly. DJU has shown me that he is a much better quarterback than last year. From what I've read on Twitter from Corey, he is not convinced of that. He has not gotten to that yet. Shane Beamer, yesterday's weekly press conference, asked, or I think this was the Big Suburbs, John Whittle, talking about how physical Kentucky typically is. He did mention also that this year's offensive line doesn't seem to be that, and Shane Beamer wouldn't quite agree with him on that one, as you would imagine a head coach would go that way. But talking about the importance of matching the physicality of Kentucky this Saturday up in Lexington. Here's Shane from yesterday's weekly press conference.
They are really, really physical, and I mean, they've always been that way. I mean, I can remember when I was at Georgia as an assistant, and Kirby used to talk about just how physical they were. And back then, this was before they had some of the new offensive coordinators, and they were doing a lot of wildcat, and it was physical downhill and trying to bloody your nose. And Kirby used to talk about that when I worked at Georgia. So that's their mentality. He's a defensive coach, and it shows. So I feel like I hope, we match up well. I like to think that we're pretty physical too. I think we've gotten better at that here the last couple of weeks. We practice physical because we're going to need to play physical on game days, but especially Saturday night. And our players certainly understand that. I mean, we've got to play physical on Saturday. There's no question about it.
To me, that's the end of the conversation. That's the entire conversation. And it's where these two programs are right now. Kentucky is and has been a physical football team in the Mark Stoops era. The one win Carolina has in their last 8 matchups, kind of the exception, where South Carolina just kind of ran all over them at Williams-Brice a couple of years ago. And right now, what Shane said about his team, he hopefully they're a physical team. I think that's exactly where they are. Nobody's buying right now. Oh yeah, South Carolina's a real physical football team. You're going to be in a fight for 60 minutes against that group. They ain't shown that, have they? At all. And one of the reasons is on defense. Matt says with Birch, I would have expected to see those plays already, It is his junior season. I get it. Chris says, Troy's the only rational Clemson fan we've all met. LOL. Josh, who was just saying how, well, let's go back to Josh's previous comment. I'm very optimistic about the future, just not the present. His very next comment, we're beating Clemson this year. And Troy says, maybe if Birch was not overrated, I'd spell his name correctly. Fair enough. Hope in this morning with an opening statement. Congrats to the Braves. I wish I could look forward to each game week for Carolina without feeling a loss is coming. Your name is Hope. I mean, this is what Will Muschamp has done to the Gamecock fan base. Has done this to Hope. Nah, I don't know. That might have happened in the Steve Spurrier era as well, certainly at the end. York in with the UFA crew as well as hour number 2 gets going here on the show. Kens, do you think you can coach physicality, or does the player just have to have it? I think you can coach it up, right? Mark Stoops just isn't a better identifier of guys who can play a physical brand of football than other football coaches. But the way that he's coached, and Shane Beamer talked about that, he I think, prides himself in having physical practices to try to develop that, to try to ingrain that in his football team. We haven't seen it. It is not a trait right now of South Carolina football. And that is on the lines of scrimmage, and not just that, too. You can't come in after a game against Georgia State and say we've got whipped on the perimeter and say you got a physical football team. I mean, you got more talented players, but if they get beat, you get their butts kicked is what they called it, I think, after that game. And that's a mindset kind of thing. That's why we heard yesterday Rick Sanford talking about it's a mindset, it's a mentality. You got to be tough. And I think that's where Gamecock fans need to pause. And instead of feeling like you've come to the conclusion that this team is not that, you got to realize that this team hasn't shown that, but still has the opportunity to. And last year, remember, this team was surprising several times in a very positive way. Florida, North Carolina bowl game, Auburn as well. So some of that potential is there. The potential is there. The production has not been there. I think it's very fair. Hope says, stop with my name is Hope. Sorry, I mean, it's there. Not my fault. You can change your YouTube handle if you really need to. Craig says 17 games, plenty of time to show you are a difference maker. Birch just isn't. Melvin Ingram didn't show through 17 games that he was a difference maker. Jadeveon Clowney did, and I get it. Birch came in as a 5-star defensive end like Clowney did. I understand what you're saying, Craig. And we all know what we've seen, right? But how does it help to badmouth a guy or just presume he's not going to be what you thought he could be? I mean, why would you want to come to that conclusion or think that that's helpful at all? Craig says Hope's middle name is Les. She did not enjoy that one. I think maybe Full. Hope Full? Right now? Maybe not. Plenty more from Shane Beamer. And again, I mentioned Corey Miller set to join us, or scheduled to join us today, I should say. First, want to give you guys a heads up about Freedom Primary Care. A partner here on the program, a proud partner of mine because of what they represent, especially in 2022. Freedom at the beginning of their name, because they will give you the freedom to make your own medical decisions with their very well-founded and well-thought-out approaches to health. 803-627-2447. Give them a call. Find out what Freedom Primary Care might be able to do for you and your family. I trust them to care for my family because I know that we see the entire health situation very similarly. That I don't send my family to a medical professional looking for a magic cure. I'm looking for their help and guidance to help cure whatever is going on with my family, not to slap a Band-Aid on something, but to figure it out and to get them back to healthy, and knowing that our own health is our own responsibility. The line that Freedom Primary Care uses that I really identify with is they're responsible to you, not responsible for you. Check them out up in Fort Mill. If you're not close to the area, you can still have plenty of telemedicine options. 803-627-2447. That's Freedom Primary Care up in Fort Mill. Appreciate them supporting the program. Appreciate you guys, as always, supporting the show as well. Hope says she's always hopeful. Wait a second. Do I have to do this? I wish I could look forward to each game week for Carolina without feeling a loss is coming. That was at 8:58. At 9:03, always hopeful. Sorry, Hope. Had to do it. Craig says, okay, Tim, does Birch play like the Clemson 5-star D lineman? I think it's fair to say he's played like Xavier Thomas did through 17 games, isn't it? Or KJ Henry even. Dabo was going off yesterday about KJ Henry coming back for another year, saying he didn't want to be a 6th-round pick and how mature he is and how much he's improved and so different. Craig, no, he doesn't. And because we don't have any other 5-stars to get excited about, so he's the one we look to. Well, Zach Pickens, also a 5-star guy in there, a guy I think who has been plenty productive. Again, talking poorly about your own players, I don't understand as a fan. I just don't get it. Does that make you feel better? It's bad fandom. What are you doing? What are you doing? No one's trying to sell you an All-American candidate who hadn't played like it. No one's trying to sell you that. And you can throw a tantrum about it all you want to, I guess, but what are you doing? RH, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. It's a great line. Is he your guy? If he's your guy, why are you going to treat him like that, man? Why? What are you doing? Teddy D. Beamer sports the garnet glasses this week. Oh, he's talking about throwing on the shades after the Kentucky win. We win the next 5 games. Then we host College Game Day November 19th against Tennessee. Wow. I think Teddy's got some strong garnet glasses on right now. But imagine that. Like, that could happen, right? The odds of that happening, I think, are near infinitesimal that Carolina goes on a 5-game win streak here. But, I mean, you can't imagine the way that Gamecock football, the perception Gamecock fans, would be amazing. Yeah, York says Clemson's 5-star defensive linemen have 3 other 5-stars besides them. Chris also picking up on that. Melvin benefited from having Clowney on the same line. Birch doesn't have that. Well, okay, Chris, but he didn't get drafted in the 1st round because he was playing beside Jadeveon Clowney. He's a physical freak. Took him a while to figure it out. He finally did, and he became one of the best players in college football. Went on to NFL stardom without Jadeveon Clowney's help. I'm not saying that it didn't hurt, but what was the big word, Chris? I don't even know. I don't listen to myself. Craig says, I'm not saying he stinks. He just isn't as good as we thought he'd be. That's all. Okay, well, either you allow yourself to believe that he can get there, or you're closed off to that possibility and you're giving up on a guy. Your choice. I know where the coaching staff is on him and everything I've heard there. And also that from the outside as fans, we're dumb. We're overly simplistic when it comes to evaluating defensive linemen. How many sacks does he have? That's pretty much it, right? Or tackles for loss? How many times does he get the guy with the ball? There's so much more to football that you have to do up there that you don't see in the stats that I hear coaches praise Jordan Birch for. I don't think it's just hype. I don't think it's I do try to key on players, especially guys that get a bunch of criticism that I think may or may not deserve it. Try to watch them without the ball as well, when the ball's not around them, how they're affecting plays. I think Birch is still one of the best Carolina defenders. And does he need to step up and make more plays? Absolutely. And then, yeah, the Clowney thing is kind of what it is, right? Having everyone focus on Clowney didn't really hurt either, though, with Melvin Ingram. I think it's the exact opposite when you're talking about Jordan Birch. And this is where, again, I think you can not do the program any favors if you're a fan and you're comparing your 5-star player to a similar type player who came in at the same position before. No one ever said that Jordan Birch was going to be the next Jadeveon Clowney. Or if they did, I never heard him evaluated in quite the same way. He was really, really highly sought after in high school and a really, really good player. But Jadeveon Clowney was a once-in-a-generation guy. And Jordan Burch wasn't hyped as that. And Gamecock fans who are holding him up to that standard or expecting anywhere close to that, you're fooling yourselves. Does he still need to be a really good player for this defense especially and need to do it now? Absolutely he does. Can he do it? I think he can. I have not ruled that out at all. But does he need to actually do it to earn to improve his reputation, to earn the label of living up to 5-star potential? No doubt. No doubt. But how you talk about him as a fan at this point, I think says a lot about what kind of fan you are. Matt says the thing about Burch that I very much like is how he shifts the direction of the field without making a tackle or a sack. Other O-lines make big allowances for him. And I forget our number, but while we're low in sacks, we're also top 3 in the SEC in pressure. Well, when you play Charlotte and South Carolina State, that's really going to help your numbers, right? And somebody else brought it up earlier. Brad Crawford on 24/7 Sports, I think Craig brought this up, put out the tweet yesterday about how the Gamecocks have blitzed more than any other Power 5 team percentage-wise this year. You don't want to have to blitz to get pressure. You recruit 5-star guys on the defensive line so you don't have to do that, right? That was the great part about the best Carolina teams. Those front 4 guys were going to pressure the quarterback. And when you can count on that as a defensive coordinator, you get so much more flexibility. Very much like on the back end, when you can count on your guys to play man coverage, you can do so much more, right? Craig says Clowney might have been a top 10 high school player ever. No one should be compared to him. Totally agree. And I think maybe that moniker, maybe that semantics, we can get into that. I think instead of high school player ever, you go prospect, because you got to know that being a prospect is different than being a player, right? I think some of the greatest high school players I've ever seen, I remember one when I was out in Texas, a 5A quarterback, went on to play Division III football because he was just a smaller guy, didn't have necessarily a rocket arm, but man, the dude did it all in high school. He was one of the best high school players I've ever seen, not one of the best high school prospects. A little different. Clowney was very productive still at South Point, doing it all. He scored 3 touchdowns in like the first 3 minutes of a high school state semifinal game I went to at Fairfield Central. Nuts. But also, I think the prospect even higher just because of the physical measurements, the physical skills, traits. Chris says, why are we blitzing so much when we are thin in the secondary? I think you answered your own question in a lot of ways, Chris. First of all, because that front 4 isn't getting consistent pressure. You got to bring pressure somewhere else. And also, you can't just allow a quarterback to sit back there, Charlotte's quarterback, to sit back there and pick you apart. Because he was doing that relatively successfully early in that game. And then when Carolina changed the formula on defense, that game changed completely. Roger, good for you, sir. Weighing in with the sunny good morning a little later than usual. He said, sorry, I slept in a bit today. Good for you. And that's where we are. And Mark Stoops was talking about that yesterday. Middle of the season, 6 weeks in, pretty banged up. Need to get back right, healthy. I think, again, that is where South Carolina has a tremendous advantage this week versus Kentucky. Kentucky coming off of, that thing was a slobber knocker, man. It was a great college football game. And they didn't win it. And sometimes that thing can linger. Yesterday, listening to Mark Stoops at his weekly press conference, there was a lot of discussion about what had just happened to Kentucky. Listening to Shane Beamer yesterday, there was next to no discussion about the most recent game Carolina played. 2 games, 2 days different I should say, in those games. Might have had a lot to do with it. I think the opponent had a lot to do with it. The significance of the Kentucky game to South Carolina's season versus the significance of the South Carolina game to Kentucky's season, I think has a lot to do with it as well. The significance of the Kentucky program, the last 8 years where they've won the last 7 games to South Carolina's program, has a lot to do with it. But my overriding point to you, mostly Gamecock fans listening to this now, is you've made it more important than it really is. A win Saturday would be massive, no doubt about it. But I think you might want to prepare yourselves if that doesn't happen. Year number 2 of Shane Beamer is not an instant failure. It's not. I understand you might feel that way. I'm gathering that most of you will feel that way. But this is not the Kentucky program of 10 years ago. If it was, then I get it. I guess I shouldn't say 10 years ago, right? Because in 2010, Kentucky beat Carolina right after they beat number 1 Alabama. This is not the Kentucky program of 15 years ago. And even that game, right? Massive disappointment for Carolina 12 years ago. They're better, and South Carolina is worse. Very simply. So you can't look at it the same way. You can have those feelings. I'm just saying that it's too much. You're riding the roller coaster, and it's gone way too high, way too low, and you would go way too high with a win here. You get a bye week after this one, right? And Shane Beamer saying very plainly yesterday at his press conference that last year they had a horrible feeling in their bye week, playing poorly against Texas A&M. And it was not fun. He would much rather have the feeling of winning a football game this year going into the bye. It turned out that the back half of the season ended up pretty good. York says the season won't be lost, but the bad Kentucky taste will remain. Yuck. I'm telling you, I'm trying to figure it out for myself as I'm trying to tell you, right? The taste of that should not be what it once was. Kentucky has earned that, right? They're not the worst bourbon. They're not bottom shelf anymore. They're not top shelf either. Don't get me wrong. Nobody's trying to make them Alabama. Nobody's trying to make them Georgia right now. They are middle of the road, maybe just above house grade bourbon right now in Kentucky. We'll go with the bourbon because, Joker Phillips is not there anymore. Mark Stoops has a national reputation of being a good football coach. He's earned it at a place that is very difficult to win football games. Off the subject, Troy says, but I sure was hoping the Clemson, South Carolina, and Alabama, Texas A&M games did not start at the same time this week. Craig says you can't spell UK without yuck. I think it's the opposite there, right? You can't spell yuck without UK. It'll never be as bad as getting beat by Vandy. Chris, that's one way to look at it. York says, agree, Tim. Losing that many to anyone, though, leaves a bad taste. Texas A&M or Clemson, for example. Yeah, and Kentucky is the worst taste of the bunch, no doubt, just based on perennial success, right? I get it. But in this season, at this time, too much emphasis, man. And it does kind of stink that 7:30 Saturday night for Troy, the Clemson fan, Gamecock fans, could pretty much care less at this one. Clemson at Boston College, a 20.5-point favorite. Still 10.5 is what I'm seeing for Kentucky being favored against the Gamecocks. At least you get the 30 minutes difference, and I think you'll probably get a few more minutes in this one. Texas A&M and Alabama, and I expect that thing to take forever. So I think you'll You'll definitely be able to watch the Carolina and Clemson games. I think probably I should say. You'll be able to watch the entirety of those games and then be able to watch, I'd say, I don't know, at least last 8 minutes of game time, Texas A&M and Alabama, if it's worth watching, which that 24-point spread says it ain't going to be. I think a lot of us would be very surprised. And I don't even know, do you want that to happen? I mean, is Jimbo the feel-good guy in that? Talked about this in May when he went after him. I wasn't pulling for one or the other, really. I loved that it happened. It was kind of one of those things where, yeah, kind of embarrassed for both you guys. This is just ugly, personal. This is professional. These are professionals going after each other. What's going on here? But I certainly would prefer Texas A&M to win that game. Second straight year after losing to Appalachian State. Just sum up college football, wouldn't it? I'm a little surprised that it's up to 24. But watching Alabama do what they did to Arkansas with their backup quarterback, I get it. Watching Texas A&M's offense struggle, I get it. Check out some other games on Saturday to keep in mind for our pick segment coming up on Friday. Again, we're 10-5 through 3 weeks, picking 5 games per week as a show. Everybody gets a voice in that conversation in the last half hour of Friday's show. So if you haven't taken part of that, would love for you to this Friday. So you can keep in mind exactly some matchups. I think we'll probably go with Tennessee and LSU. LSU getting 3 points at home. I feel really good about Tennessee's chances in this one, by the way. It's been a long time since Tennessee has been to LSU. The last time they played there, Tennessee got a goal line stand to win it. All you got to give is, we would give 3.5 in this instance. We don't have ties. It's not part of the unrestricted free agent code. There's no real code. I should probably write one down. Not part of my mindset. And then again, we got to keep things in round five numbers so I can keep the percentages right. We're 2 out of 3. We're 10-5, 66.7% success rate right now in the picks. If we keep it at 5 every week, then I can do the math. Otherwise, I'm in trouble. So you got that one noon. Great way to start, right? Tennessee, LSU. That should be fun because, I mean, the fact that LSU's ranked right now, unreal. Well, that last week, LSU and Auburn, wild. Tennessee fans certainly expect it to keep rolling. If they don't end up finishing in the top 10 like they're at right now, a lot of Tennessee fans are going to be devastated because they're loving it right now. I mean, you talk about a fan base who desperately needed that because Tennessee had gone the way of Nebraska in a lot of ways, right? Before Josh Heupel came along last year and instantly turned Tennessee's offense into a juggernaut, one of the best offenses in college football. Hendon Hooker in the Heisman Trophy discussion, belongs in that Heisman Trophy discussion based off of how he's playing. All right, well, you're going to get a lot of talented guys on LSU's side of the ball now playing defense. I know that Brian Kelly doesn't have full control of that team or program. So what happens Death Valley, Baton Rouge, Saturday at noon, going to be fascinating to see. And of course, all the LSU people were so bitter that this was a noon kick and not a night kick. I mean, imagine being an LSU fan and seeing South Carolina and Kentucky getting the 7:30 spot and Tennessee in your place getting the noon spot. Other noon game, wildly interesting, SEC East. Florida, an 11-point favorite right now against a Missouri team that should have beaten Georgia last week. I say should have. It should have gotten blown out by Georgia going into the game, right? And then as the game went on, played well enough to beat Georgia. Let's put it that way, which was shocking to, I think, all of us. Another good SEC game, noon, Saturday, Mississippi State hosting Arkansas. Mike Leach and company, an 8-point favorite right now. How about that? Arkansas goes from top 10 in the country to unranked 8-point dog on the road in Starkville. Things happen quick, don't they? Well, they do and they don't, right? The fact that College game day is at Kansas, unreal. Kansas not favored at home, though, against number 17 TCU, a touchdown underdog. But what Lance Leipold's done with that program, unreal. Absolutely unreal. Kansas just had a sellout, was able to hold on against Iowa State. Now they get College game day. It's great for college football. Great. Love it. We'll be pulling for Kansas. How do you not pull for Kansas? Back to the SEC, Auburn, Georgia, the 3:30 matchup, which is hilarious looking at that spread. Again, 30 points for the second straight week. Georgia's favored by. Almost lost to Missouri last week. This time it's the Brian Harsin, whatever it is, show that Auburn brings in after blowing that 17-0 lead to LSU last week. Decent Pac-12 matchup there, top 25 matchup at the same time. Utah at UCLA. Utah favored on the road there by 4.5 points. UCLA coming off a big win last week. Ole Miss going to Vandy. Ole Miss getting into the top 10 after that win over Kentucky last week. It's the only reason I really put this one in there. Also, only 18 points. I think I like that one for Ole Miss. Yet, you got the opportunity for a hangover after that big Kentucky win last week. Doing it on the road. They went to Georgia Tech earlier this year and absolutely just throttled the Yellow Jackets, right? Which makes me think that Vanderbilt's going to be in a world of hurt for this one. This one's on pick alert for sure. Then Clemson and Boston College, we've gone over the night games, all except a Notre Dame game to keep your eye on. They're favored at home, unranked, against the 16th ranked BYU Cougars, who have the best mascot in all the sports. You guys see that last week? Put stacked tables on top of each other, goes the push-ups, like from one level of table, throws himself up to the next level in a push-up position and gets up to the top, one arm push-ups, flips off of those things. Incredible. If you haven't seen it, just go to social media, go to Twitter, search BYU mascot. You'll be good to go. A&M Alabama, mentioned that 24-point spread, then an ACC game going on at the same time. Certainly one to keep your eye on as well. So, man, what a great day. It is kind of stacked in the noon and the late windows, right? Afternoon doesn't look like it's going to be particularly entertaining on paper. The mid-afternoon slate, I should say. But Florida State and NC State, whichever program loses this football game, will be devastated to a large degree. Be the second loss of the season after having a bunch of momentum. NC State especially looking at you. You lose at home to Florida State this year. Whew, could be rough. And then coming off that Clemson game, how do they respond? You want LSU to crush their souls, York says. Tennessee fans. They'll still be drunk at noon, LOL, Chris says about Death Valley. Troy taking exception to Death Valley. I guess the term for what we do with the picks is called coming to a consensus. I enjoy doing that, Roger says. Been looking the games over. Seems to be more big spreads this week. Glad you're doing your research, Roger. Agreed. Consensus picks for as a show, what we do on Friday. It's a blast. Let's get back into the Carolina conversation. Shane Beamer talking about Kentucky kind of at large and maybe didn't put quite the emphasis on this because you say something that seems pretty obvious, right? Well, in order to win against Kentucky, he says you have to beat them. Basically saying that you have to beat them as opposed to them beating themselves is how I heard this. See if you guys agree.
With these guys, you have to you have to beat them. You know, I mean, they get games in the fourth quarter and they find ways to win it. And same like Ole Miss the other day. I mean, they just kept chipping away. And next thing you know, they're in the fourth quarter with a chance to win the game with under a minute left. So you got to go beat them. Coach Stoops has done a great job elevating it and really impressed with just, the way they play. And they've got really good players. I mean, you look at last year's team. I mean, there was a bunch of guys that I think are on NFL rosters right now, and there's a bunch of guys on their team this year that'll be on NFL rosters also.
Don't know about that last part. I mean, Will Levis is expected to be an NFL-type quarterback. Still a long way to go. I think Saturday's game will have a lot to do with it. To me, he has to continue to step up in big games and be consistently good. I mean, to hear Mark Stoops talk about it, though, he was saying yesterday, he's like, our drop back passing is how he's talking about it. Our drop back passing is by far the best it's ever been since I've been here. So giving Will Levis a bunch of credit there. And that does not spell success for Carolina, right? Who has struggled to get pressure on the quarterback. And I think it's very fair to say has question marks in the secondary. Cam Smith has a lot to prove after consistently being penalized the last couple of weeks against Charlotte and SC State, coming in as projected by some as the number one defensive back in the country, corner in the country. RJ Roderick's now back on the field. Doesn't have exactly a proven track record of a ton of success back there with what the Gamecock secondaries have been in the last several years. Nick Warrior, the freshman, has played tremendously. No doubt about it. He deserves probably the most credit, right? But Darius Rush expected back. Marcellus Dial has to play well for Carolina. Will get his fair share of targets. Typically going away from the highly talented, projected NFL type guy in Cam Smith. So those guys have to make plays for the Gamecocks. Spencer Rattler yesterday, I thought it was interesting. One of the comments he said, Carolina's best players have to play well. And I don't think we've seen that this year. We haven't seen Carolina's best players at their best in any of these games, have we? We haven't, and I think that's why the frustration level is as high as it is, or maybe the optimism level is as low as it is right now for Carolina fans. But that's where I'm trying to make sure that you haven't gone too far down that road or on that roller coaster with your emotions and going off of just what you've seen based off of Shane Beamer's brief track record of last year, right? Good to know. Troy, my favorite pick this week, Pitt over Virginia Tech. Interesting. I get Pitt coming off of an embarrassing loss to Georgia Tech, but Virginia Tech also got embarrassed last week, so that's my concern about that one. York says, catching my wife's team, undefeated Benedict first, then getting ready for Gamecock football on Saturday. We'll be looking at the scoreboard, though. Great games on tap. Absolutely. Good to know, York. Glad to see Benedict's undefeated. Yeah, getting Darius Rush back should help, Craig. Should. Having David Spalding back, I think, as an option back there. We don't talk about him very much. He hasn't made a ton of significant plays maybe for Carolina, but he's been in the starting lineup for a reason. And being out there where Carolina kind of is most thin in the defensive backfield has had an impact, I think. But those are the guys that have to step up as well. First of all, it's kind of a given in the SEC that your best players have to be at their best if you're going to win on the road against good teams. They just have to. That's a given. That's a baseline foundational piece. I mean, you almost have to do that just to be in the game, right? To be competitive. And South Carolina has had issues with that. We've seen it happen where that hasn't been the case, and it's been ugly. So that's where you got to start from. Best players have to be at their best. And then you got to have other guys that you're not expecting to be your best players come up and make some big-time plays. And those names, Darius Rush, Marcellus Dial, David Spalding, I think massively important. You get some plays out of those guys, you get a bounce or two that goes your way back there. You're able to get some early momentum, get some confidence, keep the crowd from being a big factor, and Kentucky instantly regaining its confidence after they just lost a game. I think that's all very important. Chris says, hopefully with the 2 extra days of practice, they've schemed something up. Well, you know they've certainly had the opportunity. Troy, Virginia Tech gets embarrassed every week. Yeah, it's rough up there, isn't it? And that is the program that I would point to from the Gamecock perspective. Hey, if you think your program deserves more right now, look at Virginia Tech. You can go to several different programs, right? Look at Colorado. Look at Arizona State. I think those programs can argue more perennial success than South Carolina, and certainly just kind of in the doldrums right now. Arizona, throw them in there. Oof. Craig says, I'd like to see DQ Smith win that nickel spot with his size and physicality, but can he cover the slot is the question. Well, I don't think you would like to see that, Craig. I guess I understand what you're saying, but I think it will be better for him to not have to be that guy. Let's put it that way. Maybe last 2 or 3 games of the season, having worked his way in there, I'd go more there than now, because I think there's just you make a mistake back there and it's a touchdown. And when you're a true freshman, you've seen Nick Emenwari especially, but DQ Smith has been out there a bunch, and neither one of those guys played in the secondary in high school. It's crazy, right? They're football guys, though. We've heard it. But I think if you see DQ Smith on the field a bunch in the next few games, that's not a good sign for the Gamecock defense. Just because the experience isn't there. Not trying to knock the guy at all. Been tremendous so far in his first several games. Doing it coming up after being a high school quarterback. Amazing. Deserves a ton of credit. But I think needs to be just a spot fill-in guy as opposed to the guy you're relying on. I get it, though. You want to see a bigger guy back there, maybe more chances to make plays. We'll see how it goes. Chris, Facebook live stream, with the way they're throwing the ball, having them coming back to give us depth, let's up that interception stat. Okay, with the way that Kentucky throws the football, you're saying? A couple of guys in to improve the defensive secondary depth. Then you can up that interception total, which is way up there in the country right now, leads the SEC. To me, that's the recipe. Stealing a little bit from Rick Sanford yesterday, talking about how important turnovers are. If the turnover game doesn't change for Carolina in what it was in SEC play, right? If Spencer Rattler throws a couple of picks and the Gamecocks don't get turnovers, I don't think they have much of a chance in Lexington. Because how else do you come up with that recipe that Carolina is going to be even in the game at that point, right? You're going to rely on your run game or your pass game that has shown consistency or big play ability. You haven't really seen that, especially against SEC competition. You gotta get some turnovers. Chris Rodriguez has shown that he'll put the ball on the ground. Carolina needs to force a fumble this season. The fact that they played 5 games and haven't forced a fumble, I think, is an indictment to me on the linebacking group. And I get it. Mo Kaba was your guy, and he's out injured, and they battled injuries there. It means you're just not hitting people hard enough, right? You should at some point, especially when you're playing against South Carolina State and Charlotte, knock a ball out and pick it up. That hadn't happened yet. No, turnovers also do come in bunches, and you can't quite explain them all the time. And Carolina did lead the SEC in turnovers defensively last year. So maybe it's a higher standard than games into a season. You should have a fumble. You should force a fumble. Now, with those picks, strength of the defense. Keep it going, right? Roger says, I think my hometown boy, Marcellus Dial, had his first pick of the year last week. Got to get more. Thought he was going to say congratulations to him. Nope, got to get more. Classic of where the Gamecock program is and where fans are as well. And my buddy Mike Gillespie from ABC Columbia yesterday mentioning how much fans have this game circled with what was said at SEC Media Days about the glasses comments, with the 7 out of the last 8. He asked if Shane Beamer and the team was feeling any of that extra emphasis on the Kentucky game this week.
This is a game that was a big game when I was here before. I remember, I think I talked about it last week, was the Kentucky coming in here nationally ranked on a Thursday night and us winning. And then all you guys that were here remember, we beat Alabama. They were number 1 in the country. And then I'm still having visions of Randall Cobb on fourth down or whatever it was on a game-winning touchdown pass. This game's always been competitive, and I think it's two programs that have a lot of respect, for each other. And it's certainly a critical game for us. It's the next one on the schedule. And we had a heck of a game with them last year and couldn't quite finish and get over the hump and win that game. And I know our guys are excited for the challenge this week.
So Shane definitely sidestepping that one. After the game on Saturday night, if Carolina wins, he will absolutely admit, there was a little something extra to this one. Really hope the Gamecock fan base enjoys this one, and I would think acknowledging the significance of it. He knows. And he knows he shouldn't say anything. And that's what we just heard. Players don't know. I think most players don't have a clue how much this game means to the fan base. Why it has a lot of you where you are right now. Because the being able to feel superior to a entrenched fan base in the SEC, I think meant a lot to Gamecock fans. I remember very distinctly the independent days. I mentioned Virginia Tech a little while ago, going up to Virginia Tech, and I know Shane has mentioned that as well. Shane and I are basically the same age. So for some reason, that series really sticks out. I think in both our memories, that it just being a big-time environment, really fun games. Because you didn't get that consistently then against almost an equal opponent that was in a similar situation. Like, they were independent then too, right? It's crazy. We're talking about independent college football, isn't it? To where we've come now. But that's the way it was. And then for South Carolina to make the massive move to the SEC, everything that signified, right? It meant, especially at the time, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, in that order. Maybe Florida, Tennessee, Georgia. Put it in that order. Whatever it was. Florida and Tennessee, national powers. Georgia, not that. But had won a national championship, a dozen years before or so. And still a really, really good football program. So those were the main challenges, right? And then it was, all right, where are you going to win football games? And for South Carolina, in the division then, it was Vandy and Kentucky every single year almost. Vandy certainly every single year almost. And Kentucky, yes, you're a better football program than them. That meant a lot to Gamecock fans, I think. Hang your hat on it. And now to have finished in the top 10 3 consecutive seasons, to have won an SEC East Division championship back in 2010, but then to almost immediately in 2014, that's when this streak started for Mark Stoops at home against the Gamecocks. Hasn't lost. To see Kentucky get in the passing lane, move you over, or maybe they passed on the right side, right? Where you thought your program was in the passing lane at that point, and Kentucky and Mark Stoops just in some kind of what weird vehicle would they be? Maybe a beat up pickup truck, wouldn't it? In their beat up pickup truck with a few bumper stickers on the back, right? Something like wussies wear sunglasses, or defense is the best fence, something dumb, right? Just zoom on by. Just like, how does that guy, how did they pass us? I think. And then especially when you had a guy with a very similar mindset as the head coach, blue collar, defensive minded, not going to beat ourselves, disciplined football team, preparation is key. And the other program does that better than yours. That's tough, man. That has been the biggest disappointment of South Carolina football in the last decade, hasn't it? 7 out of 8 to Kentucky. With what Kentucky represented in the SEC to South Carolina football. Craig says we really are in as good a spot as we can be going in on Saturday. Health-wise, more days to prepare. Played a lesser opponent last week, and they're beat up. And their quarterback put his finger on backwards. It's just hard to be positive yet, Craig says. Yeah, I think Gamecock fans, you can start to build that hope, man. It's okay. I think you need to know you're in a much better spot. And there are factors in your favor in this game. There absolutely are. Now, there are plenty of factors, too, in Kentucky's favor. The big ones, right? Having a physical defense that's proven they can limit a run game. Having a history of winning this matchup, certainly in Kentucky's favor. They expect to beat South Carolina. No one on that team has ever lost to South Carolina, in Lexington for sure. And very few have lost to them at all. That means something. It could mean something in the other direction for South Carolina players. If Shane Beamer can convey how important it is to play well and to prove themselves. I think how many people doubt this South Carolina team and how a win at Kentucky can do exactly what he mentioned. He tried to convey to his team symbolically by picking up trash and putting it away, clean it up, get whatever's in your way out of your way. This is the next obstacle that is in Shane Beamer and South Carolina football's way to getting back to relevance nationally. You can't win on the road, you're irrelevant. You're not a good football team. South Carolina hasn't been able to win on the road. Winning at Vandy this year doesn't change that. You're going to tell me it's the first win for the program under Shane Beamer on the road in the SEC? Yeah, that's something. Vandy doesn't count. We all know that. It's the SEC and Vandy. Kentucky counts, and they count significantly right now in the SEC. What needs to happen for Carolina to do this is to play well offensively. I find it hard to believe that Carolina will play well offensively in this game if they don't get off to a good start. That entails finding some plays and finding early success in the game. which translates directly into scripting plays that you're going to have success with, something that Marcus Satterfield does not have a good track record. The offensive coordinator. We really just haven't seen it from the Carolina offensive perspective, maybe outside of that bowl game against North Carolina. Shane Beamer talking about the scripting process yesterday. I found it fascinating at his weekly press conference.
These are the opening 10 plays we want to get called early. One, it's something that we like. Two, it may be, let's see how they're going to play this formation. Three, let's run this to try and set this up later. I thought Lincoln, that was one of the great things I learned from Lincoln Riley, was every Friday we'd sit down as a coach, as an offensive staff, and he would say, okay, when I call this, you guys in the press box, make sure you're watching for that, because I want to see if this is going to be there. And when I call this, make sure somebody has their eyes on the will linebacker, because if he does X, we're going to do Y, and type thing. And then it's also first third down, here's what we're going to call. First time we're on the goal line, here's what we're going to call. So a lot of it is what we do well, but also how we want to attack them and how we want to set things up later in the game, for sure. And then we talk about it as a staff, and then we go over it with the offense on Friday night. I mean, that's what the Friday night offensive meeting is here's the openers, here's how we're gonna start the game.
So much information right there. And what I heard, checkers versus chess. I think most of us, I'm certainly in that category, watch football and it's checkers. Right? Oh, your move didn't work. They made a better move. You're not a very good coach or team or player. High-level coaches see chess, right? First of all, they understand how the board is set up much better than we do. What kind of defense they're playing, or what kind of defense they're showing, and then what kind of defense they end up in, what kind of offensive formation, what that means the tendency might be. You in 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel. Oh, okay. Well, the last time they lined up in 13 personnel, 100% of the time they're running it. If they got Nate Atkins out there, like Shane Beamer was saying, we got to break that tendency. That's chess, right? I will be the first one to admit, we basically talk checkers, right? The fan conversation, our conversation, is a checkers outlook on chess in a lot of ways. And that's where the comment with Shane getting even a little defensive yesterday at the end of his press conference, saying that talking heads on social media don't know what they're talking about. I know. I know I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay? I'm not trying to pretend otherwise. We are having a separate discussion that if you're even commenting on what it is, that's a bad sign, right? He said that his players have to make sure they know that to avoid any kind of outside distraction, any outside noise. Yeah, if players care about what's being talked about on the internet, that's a really bad spot, man. That's a fundamental issue, I think, that you got to get a hold of real quick if you're a coach in 2022. Be the first to admit, we talk checkers. Fascinating to me. I'm going to coach my 9-year-old and 7-year-old in flag football a little differently, knowing that Lincoln Riley tells his coaches to watch a specific thing on a specific play so they can use it later in the game. Makes all the sense in the world, right? I haven't gotten to that place in my flag football volunteer coaching. And for coaches to pretend that they should hold that talking heads like me should have more information or a much more educated conversation with fans is ridiculous, right? Just ridiculous. But what I was hearing in that, so fascinating. And I can only come to the conclusion, man, that has got to be a massive kick in the gut when your Friday night meeting, Friday night after Friday night after Friday night, is, hey, here are our plays that we feel really good about. You guys ready? We're going to do this. We're going to get rolling. And then you get into a game and it didn't work. You get into a game and what you thought, what you've worked on all week, that looked good in practice, that you felt good about, that you all the preparation that goes into it, right? Hey, we think this is going to work. And if they come out in this formation, we're going to do this because we've looked at hours and hours of video, and then it doesn't work consistently. I mean, this is the reputation that Marcus Satterfield has earned, unfortunately for him. This is not some sort of unfair fan expectation where, no, expected them to be the culmination of an Oklahoma LSU Joe Brady offense and combine those two and be the best offense in the history of college football. None of that. It's just, hey, can you get a touchdown on the first drive? Can you get a touchdown in the first quarter in the SEC? Can you do that once? One time. So for it to not have happened as consistently as it hasn't happened, that's got to be really frustrating for an offense. I would think the opposite might have the same kind of important impact if you can have success early and what you do script, what you have talked about works against a good team. I think you can look around and say, hey, boys, this could be the night. This is different. I'm feeling good. Maybe this is when the best players play their best. Craig, on the other side of that, if we get off to a slow start, you'll be able to hear the eyes rolling. There's that too, right? Chris says, basic formula for winning. Score on offense, limit big plays on defense, make them kick field goals. Can't get any more basic than that, LOL. Now, it's not just that, though. That can't be just the formula for this team. That's the formula when you have even teams, I think, right? Carolina's not even in Kentucky right now. Kentucky is favored by double digits for a reason. You got to get turnovers. You got to make sure you don't turn it over. Because we saw in that Arkansas game, if it goes the other way, nope. Craig says, title today, We Talk Checkers. That might just be like the subtitle for the show. We Talk Checkers. Great question, Troy. Well, first of all, hold on a second. So 9 and 10-year-old flag football, you can't go on the field. So the buyout has to be higher, because you got to prepare a lot more, right? For my 7 and 8-year-old team, I can go out in the field, I can draw up plays in the huddle and the whole thing. A little bit more elementary. Still negotiating those with my agent. Jimmy Sexton hasn't returned my calls for some reason. LOL, but they look good in practice, Chris says. $5s of dollars. Good answer there, Greg. RL's done with us. He says, stay blessed, everyone. Same to you, RL. But are you guys with me on that scripting comment? I've always heard the conversation around it, but not to that detail of these are the 10 plays that we feel are our best plays. This is what we got, including all right, we getting goal line. This is the first play we're going to run, man. Getting third down. What do you want to run most? That's what we're going to do. Well, think about that if it doesn't work then, right? I assume he didn't get into the detail. You got to have 1A, 1B, 1C ideally, right? Because that first one doesn't work. You got to have another play you feel confident in, right? Steve Spurrier, I think, was so confident. I'll never forget the SEC championship game where it didn't go well, but Carolina's best play was throwing it up to Alshon from the 2-yard line in the end zone. They did it 3 times in a row. Never hit on it. So how much you go back to those plays really tells you how much you believe in them, right? Or maybe how much you don't believe in other plays. BW, I think this is the highest point spread against Kentucky I've ever seen. I don't know. I have to go back on that one. Some BS, BW says. Chris with a have a good one, Tim, fellow Gamecocks, Tater Troy, go Cox. Hope the conversation has been maybe relatively therapeutic for some of you, relatively entertaining for everyone, worth your time. Appreciate your contributions to it, especially all you guys in the live chat. Appreciate everybody being a part of the show as always. Unrestricted Free Agent, streaming live every Monday through Friday, 8 to 10. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Even the audio version's just on Podbean. Roger says, enjoy the show as always. I'll go back and watch what I missed. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. Good for you sleeping in, Roger. For those of us who were up and at 'em this morning, good for you as well. Anthony, see everybody tomorrow. Craig, how much do we owe you for the session? This one's a freebie there, Craig. We'll work out details of this and my flag football buyout later on. That'll do it for the October 5th edition. Tim Hill, Unrestricted Free Agent.